Is a perfect crime possible? Many in the criminal underworld meticulously plan every detail, attempting to break the law and remain unpunished. However, fate itself sometimes intervenes, altering even the most perfect plans. In today's video, we explore an almost perfect crime, foiled by one small detail that led to its resolution. In 2018, in the small town of Sodus, New York, with a population of just 8,000, a young couple, Josh Niles and his beloved Amber Washburn, settled on Carlton Street. Josh Niles grew up in Newark, Wayne County, in a large family with 5 children. They were close-knit, and he also dreamed of having several children. At the time of the events described, Josh was 28 years old, and Amber was 4 years younger. They had been dating for several years before moving in together. At that time, they were not officially married. Josh Niles had 2 children from a previous early marriage who lived with the couple. Additionally, the couple was raising another child together, whom they named Joshua Jr. Amber got along well with her boyfriend's children and treated them as her own. Life was moving along smoothly. Josh had saved some money and was planning to soon launch a small business for lawn and property care. His girlfriend managed the household, the children, and was also looking to get a job. Everything was pointing towards the couple getting married and living a happy family life. But this story does not have a happy ending. On October 22, 2018, Josh Niles left his house around 2 p.m., intending to go to work. The man started his car and drove onto the driveway, after which he noticed a man sitting on a bench near his house. It felt as if the man was waiting for him, so Josh approached the stranger. According to neighbors who happened to notice, the 2 men talked for a while and both looked upset, after which shots rang out. The stranger shot Josh. Amber was also on the driveway in her car. She was returning home and was backing into the driveway. At that very moment, after Josh's murder, the assailant abandoned his bleeding boyfriend. He ran to the car and shouted the girl's name. He shot through the windshield of her car, hitting her head with the first shot. Everything happened very quickly, so Amber, who had witnessed the attack on her fiancé, simply didn't have time to drive away, even though she tried to escape. A neighbor, who witnessed the crime, quickly ran back in her house, hearing other shots behind her, not understanding where they were coming from. She closed the door and prayed for it all to end quickly, and then everything went quiet. As it turned out later, the assailant fired several more shots at Josh before fleeing. The frightened neighbor immediately called emergency services 911 and reported a shooting in the area. Patrol officers arrived almost immediately within a few minutes. They found Josh's body near his car. He had multiple gunshot wounds to the chest area. A little further down the street, Amber's car was found. It was rolling backward until it stopped. Its owner was also dead, and in the back seat was her 4-year-old son, Joshua Jr., who was eating McDonald's chicken nuggets. The child was autistic. He didn't understand what had happened, but was very frightened by the sounds of gunfire. However, the important thing is that he was alive. The other children, surprisingly, were not in the car. Where could they have gone? It was later discovered that the children were at school and were all right. Upon examination of the crime scene, about 13 shell casings were found. Josh was shot 12 times, and Amber was fatally wounded once in the head. It was clear that all of the assailant's anger was directed at the man. Amber had possibly become an accidental witness to the attack, which is why she was also eliminated. Most witnesses didn't even realize it was gunfire. They thought someone was setting off fireworks. However, the testimonies of some witnesses proved very useful. Eyewitnesses described the assailant. He was a man dressed in black clothes and wearing a green hat. Unfortunately, his face could not be seen clearly from a distance, and moreover, it was covered. After the attack, the perpetrator fled, escaping through the backyards of neighboring houses. He did not have a car. Investigators immediately began questioning everyone who might have seen a similar man running through their backyards, and also searched for surveillance camera footage in the area, proceeding to study it. Given the lack of information about the perpetrator's intentions, it was decided to close the nearest school. Police deployed search dogs, believing that the fugitive perpetrator might still be in the area. The search operation lasted for several hours, but the attacker could not be found. The dogs led the police to a remote parking lot where the trail ended. Presumably, the perpetrator got into a car and drove away, which is why the dog could not pick up the further trail. The only thing detectives managed to find was a ski mask discarded in a dumpster at the parking lot. Interviewed neighbors of the victims confirmed that they had seen a man in a similar mask when he was running away. However, he was also wearing a hood, so they could not discern any facial features either. This person had been seen wandering around the area sometime before the shooting. It seemed as if he was cautiously stalking someone. All local residents were terrified. Nothing like this had ever happened in their quiet, peaceful town before. They feared that the perpetrator, who was still at large, could pose a danger to other people. But the police were confident that this was a targeted attack and that the perpetrator posed no threat to others. Police tried to calm the public, understanding that the primary task for ensuring safety in the city was to find and arrest the attacker, and therefore, they were making every effort. Investigators established that this was not a random robbery-type attack. It was a targeted assault on specific individuals who were being waited for. The perpetrator knew Amber's name, and Josh had communicated with him. Also, the perpetrator was a good shot, as he shot Amber the first time. But who could wish harm upon this young couple? Detectives began to examine the social circle of the young family to identify possible suspects, and the first ones to raise suspicion were Josh's ex-wife, Charlene Childers, and her husband, Timothy Dean. Josh and Charlene's previous marriage had not worked out. The 18-year-old Josh met Charlene through a mutual friend when she was 16. They immediately found common ground and started dating, and later Charlene moved in with Josh and his parents when she had problems at home. In July 2009, they had a daughter, got married, and moved into their own home. 5 years later, another child was born. While they lived together, their relationship was turbulent and tense. Josh was stubborn, and Charlene constantly provoked fights. They often quarreled. As a result, the couple divorced, and Charlene moved with her children to the small town of San Ray, Texas. After the divorce, a serious dispute over child custody began. Each spouse wanted full custody, and they could not agree. After moving to Texas, Charlene quickly married James Childers, but this marriage ended in divorce shortly after. Then Charlene got together with Timothy Dean, whom she later married. Josh, he was a typical abuser. He laid hands on her and the children. It turned out that shortly before the tragedy, Timothy Dean had used physical force against Charlene's daughter. Once, the girl did not want to eat, and then he hit her in the face, which was captured on his new wife's recording, but she did not pay much attention to it. The woman shared the video on her social media page, and this information reached the child's father. Josh reported this to the police, after which an investigation was conducted, which confirmed this information. Tim was arrested and charged with child abuse. Because of this, the former spouse's children were returned to their father, Josh, in New York. Due to the facts of abuse by Tim and Charlene's inaction, there were all grounds to believe that Josh would receive full custody. It seemed that the lives of the children and Josh were improving, and this was indeed the case until October 2018, the day their blood was shed. Due to the tumultuous dispute between the former spouses over child custody, and because they were the only ones in conflict with the deceased, the police paid close attention to them. Detectives approached Charlene. At this time, she was in another state, Texas, and theoretically could not have participated in the attack on the couple. The woman was aware of what had happened, as she had received notifications on social media. According to her, she opened the news, and it reported on the attack, the deceased, and the search operation being conducted by the police. Charlene was worried about her children and was relieved when she realized they were all right. The woman claimed she had nothing to do with the crime, as she was far from the scene. Her alibi was confirmed, so Charlene was removed from the list of suspects. The The relatives of the murdered Josh and Amber were stunned by the news of the murders. They immediately provided the police with important information. The relatives were convinced that Josh's ex-wife, Charlene, and her husband, who often quarreled with the deceased and threatened them over the children, were involved in this case. Close ones were certain that there was simply no one else who could have done it, and the nature of the attack was clearly personal, so Charlene was not entirely ruled out. Meanwhile, forensic experts thoroughly examined the crime scene and began to correlate the collected information. Given that a dialogue took place between the victim and the shooter before the attack, they knew each other. Furthermore, the attacker knew Amber's name. The police leaned towards the conclusion that this was clearly a premeditated murder. As neighbors had seen the killer waiting for the couple, nothing was stolen, and 12 shots were fired at the deceased. The perpetrator acted with certainty. His goal was specifically murder. Charlene Childers, the victim's ex-wife, became an important witness for the police. Neighbors and friends of Josh spoke highly of him and his wife. They had only lived in the area for a few months, but they were always polite and friendly. However, the ex-wife revealed the other side of the murdered man. She described him as an unpredictable person who could resort to physical force. Additionally, according to her, he had problems with psychoactive substances. Police found confirmation of these facts in archived records, which indicated that he had smoked marijuana in his youth. However, despite this, Charlene remained on the side of her children's father. She was indignant and even furious that someone had taken their loved one from them. In light of her testimony about substances, investigators developed new theories, as a person with severe addiction might have become involved with the criminal underworld, and the shooting could have been a drug-related dispute, possibly due to a large debt to dealers. However, these assumptions were not confirmed. Toxicological examinations showed that the bodies of the murdered couple contained neither alcohol nor any substances. Close ones of the deceased denied that they had taken anything, and no traces of substances were found in their home. After analyzing the victim's correspondence and calls, the police discovered that they had no connections with drug dealers. Therefore, they were convinced that this version was simply untenable. Police continued to analyze the victim's immediate circle. There was no one else suspicious, and all threads led to Charlene and Timothy Dean, whom she married in 2018. Then they began to study the man and his possible involvement in the crime. It turned out that Tim and Charlene met when they crossed paths at work in Texas. Charlene was working in animal control at the time and was divorced while Tim worked in law enforcement. A romance immediately began between them. Tim was described as an aggressive person with a turbulent past, and some believed he was quite capable of murder. Moreover, the story of Charlene's abuse of children characterized him in a less than favorable light. Most surprisingly, Timothy Dean was once the chief of a police precinct in Texas, but was disgracefully dismissed from the police force after the incident with the children. Due to his damaged reputation, he had great difficulty finding new employment and took a job as a fast food delivery courier. Around the same time, rumors emerged that Tim was very determined to take revenge for being fired from the police. Naturally, he was angry at Josh for causing him trouble. Concurrently, Josh and Amber had the opportunity to pick up the children from a previous marriage. A court case was impending that was meant to settle the custody issue. But Charlene was not going to give up. She wanted to take the children and was determined to fight her ex-husband in court. As early as August 2018, she had traveled to New York, and the court told her she would not get her children while she was married and living with a person accused of abuse. She promised to divorce Tim for the sake of the children. This further heightened the detective's attention to Tim. It turned out that not only had he lost his job, but he could also lose his wife, his home, and everything he had built over many years. Tim might have had a motive to get rid of Josh and his fiancée, revenge, and the opportunity to gain full custody of his wife's children. And he had no alibi at the time of the murder, making him the main suspect in the case. However, for arrest and indictment, substantial evidence was needed, not just speculation. To gather more information, police obtained a warrant to search and wiretap Tim's phone conversations, and then crucial information came to light. It turned out that shortly before the shooting, he had been in an accident in a rented car 400 kilometers from New York. This all happened in Kansas, which Tim Dean had managed to reach. But it was completely unclear what the former cop was doing there and why he had so hastily disappeared. This raised even more suspicions against him. During the accident, police inspected the former officer's vehicle. The man had no psychoactive substances on him, but he was carrying his shotgun and ammunition in the trunk. However, he did have a permit for the weapon. Therefore, he managed to evade police attention and escape using an Uber taxi. This incident was practically ignored at the time. However, after the attack, detectives, upon learning about the accident, traced Tim's rented car to the mechanic who towed it after the crash. The man was interviewed. He reported that during the car's repair, he found various magazines with cartridges of several calibers in the trunk. There was also a shotgun and a tactical vest inside. It was a black accessory, but without ballistic inserts. Such vests are used for sport shooting or hunting to hold ammunition in sewn-in pockets and pouches. Tim Dean told everyone that he was trying to get to New York, allegedly to visit some distant relative. The police learned this story based on witness testimonies and surveillance camera footage from car rental companies. The main suspect, as it turned out, visited several such organizations, but he only managed to rent a vehicle from one of them. He used cash, which was reluctantly accepted, thus attracting attention because he was denied everywhere else. Later, the driver was spotted directly in New York near a supermarket in a rented car. All of this turned out to be even more suspicious. The man rented a car instead of using his own and tried to pay with cash. It seemed that, as an experienced cop, he was doing his best to hide his movements, but he still left traces due to the accident, where his real name was revealed. This gave the police sufficient grounds for arrest, as well as a more thorough investigation into Tim's involvement in the murders. Tim Dean was detained and taken to the police station for questioning. During the interrogation, the suspect told an incredible story. According to him, Tim wanted to embark on a grand journey, overcoming difficulties to win back his new wife, with whom he had quarreled, and went to New York State to talk to her uncle. Tim hoped that this person would allow him to mend his relationship with his beloved. At the same time, he did not confirm ever having met the victims of the crime. Despite the large number of coincidences, the police's fears were not confirmed. There was too little information, and Tim denied any connection to the crime. Therefore, law enforcement officers were forced to release Tim. But investigators continued to study the information. It turned out that Tim Dean rented the car for his trip not in his own name, but in the name of his friend and former colleague from his days as a police officer in Texas, Bron Bowler. Following this, it was decided to interview this friend. During the interrogation, the man denied being aware of his friend's plans, stating he simply fulfilled his request as a friend. However, detectives sensed that this was not entirely true and that he was not completely innocent. Investigators informed Braun that if he truly knew something but continued to withhold important information, and if Tim's guilt were proven, he would become an accomplice and receive a significant sentence. In any case, investigators intended to use a polygraph for verification. He failed the lie detector test. After this, Braun broke down and informed detectives that a plot for a double homicide had been planned in Tim Dean's house. Two experienced officers had managed to think through all the details to cover their tracks and avoid responsibility for the murders. During the process, it was decided how to provide Tim with a car, and they opted to rent it through a friend. Tim's name was not listed in the documents, so the perpetrator hoped to remain undetected. This plan almost worked. The former officer intended to travel to New York through several states, remaining unnoticed. However, an accident became the cause of his failure. The next participant in the conspiracy was Charlene, the ex-wife of the victim, for whom Tim Dean, it was presumed, committed the crime. The moment the court took her children away, she became the instigator of the crime. According to Braun's testimony, it was she who told Tim that Josh and Amber needed to be eliminated. Only then could their lives return to their usual course. Furthermore, the woman provided additional funds for renting a second car using her credit card, as Tim only had cash on him, which was not accepted by firms in Kansas after his escape from the accident scene. It was clear that she was also involved in this crime. Just 2 weeks after the double murder, Braun, Charlene, and Tim were arrested. Tim was charged with 6 counts, including first-degree murder, second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and illegal possession of a firearm. Charlene was charged with manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, and Braun with complicity. The woman also confessed to everything and cooperated with the police investigation to receive a lighter sentence. Her assistance was not significantly helpful, as investigators already had all the evidence before the charges were filed. Specifically, Tim Dean's DNA was found on the ski mask discovered by the dogs, which was confirmed by the relevant forensic examination. Nevertheless, the woman became an important witness. To be fair, her attempt to slander Josh, the father of her children, was unsuccessful. Despite minor past offenses, no one else described him negatively, except for his ex-wife, who had a vested interest in doing so. The shooter, Tim Dean, maintained his innocence until the very end, but it did not work. Tim was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the court session, hearings, and sentencing, the man remained calm. He showed no regret or remorse and refused any comments or communication with the victims' families. He remains at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. Braun Bowler received a 3-year prison sentence for complicity. He was released after serving 16 months of his sentence. Charlene was also found guilty, but for her cooperation with the police, she received a 28-year prison sentence, which is significantly less than the maximum possible term. Charlene will be eligible for release in 2042. Currently, she remains at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York. Custody of Josh and Charlene's 2 children was granted to his sister, and custody of the deceased couple's shared son was granted to Amber's parents. It turned out that the boy has autism, so his grandparents had to learn to raise a child with special needs. Also, let's discuss this story in the comments, and I also suggest watching these videos. Thank you all and goodbye.